Welcome to the Blueprint Podcast, where we throw out the old blueprints so you can become who you were always meant to be. I'm your host, Jason Smith, and if you haven't already, make sure you click the subscribe button and share this podcast with your friends on social media and tag me in it at JBirdFit. Today, I have a very special guest for you, Mark Groves. He is a human connection specialist, author, and founder of Created Love. With a background in communication and psychology, Mark has built a global community dedicated to helping people deepen their relationships and live more authentically. Through his books, courses, podcasts, and live events, Mark equips individuals with practical tools to navigate love, heartbreak, emotional health, and personal growth. He's known for his ability to bridge the gap between science and the human experience, offering grounded insights on modern relationships, emotional fluency, and conscious leadership. His work has reached millions worldwide, empowering people to reclaim their personal power, cultivate self-awareness, and create meaningful connections in every area of life. Mark Groves, welcome to the Blueprint Podcast. The question today is, what does it really mean to be a man? Not the surface answers, not the bravado, the performance, but the truth beneath it all. Beneath the expectations, the titles, and the roles we play, there's something underneath the surface of that's real, raw, innate, primal, and it can feel oftentimes like something's missing. In Wild at Heart by John Eldridge, he writes that every man has a battle to fight, an adventure to live, and a beauty to love. Robert Bly in Iron John tells us that deep in the soul of every man is the wild man, not dangerous in his essence, but dangerous when repressed. We're talking about masculine wounds, healing, love, leadership, and the reclamation of the masculine heart. And I couldn't think of a better guest to have than Mark Groves. Mark is the founder of Created Love and author of Liberated Love. He's built a global community helping people reconnect to themselves and create honest, meaningful relationships. He understands deeply the masculine and feminine dance, the role of wounding, and the power of coming home to yourself. So if you're watching this today or you're catching it on the replay, this is going to be for you. Mark Groves, thanks for being here.
Man, thanks for having me. That radio voice, I'm so captivated.
I try. I've been working on it. So one of the things that we were just talking about and that I've noticed is the lack of participation in the groups that people pay for. I want to dive into that just a little bit because it's something that we spend a lot of time to create, to cultivate, to build, to research. We get people to the place where they follow the content, they love what we're doing, they appreciate what they're receiving just through the content by itself, and they take that first step into uncertainty that is, I'm going to pay for something. And I'm choosing myself in this moment. Like they went through the sales page, they looked at it, they read everything. They may have read it twice. They watched the video 3 times and they're like, okay, now I'm ready. I'm going to do it. They click on it and they sign up, and they might show up for the first video or the first part of the series. And then a week goes by and you're ready for the next one. And then it just slowly drifts off. Why do you think that is?
I think there's probably a lot of content overload for people. Think about our platforms, our social media platforms. The algorithms are just like constantly feeding people more stuff. And that stuff is not necessarily stuff we from our soul want to watch, but algorithmically is being fed to us. And somehow we end up 25 minutes later wondering why we're watching 4x4 trucks crash. And, there's an Instagram account called Kids Getting Hurt, which I don't know why when it comes through my feed, it's funny when a ball hits a kid in the head, but I find it's so easy to get captured by that stuff. And then when you're signing up for things that are really intentional and things you want to really know resonate with the desire for you to learn and who you want to become, we might have already extracted so much from our attention and information that we're not, in that case, showing up for ourselves. So we're not choosing to consume the content that we know is going to expand us. I'm not saying that's always true, but maybe there's also a conditioning now for people that they sign up for a course or a thing and it doesn't really even mean anything anymore on some level. That's obviously not true for everybody. But isn't the online course completion rate something like 6 or 8%? So it's really quite low.
Yeah. It's something that I've experienced myself. I've paid for courses and I've gone through the first couple lives, and then life happens, you get busy, there's other circumstances and the background, you're struggling to get through other things that are going on in your life and you don't know how to do that. Now I'm trying to navigate this course on top of it. So that's a struggle. If I can't manage all this other stuff, how can I manage taking this on too? I have noticed that people do come back like 6 months later and they're asking for their passwords and they're trying to figure it out. So I think
Yeah.
eventually some people, they do come back and they circle back around to see what it was all about and they restart their journey. I want people to know we're not shaming you here. We're not trying to cause you any type of guilt, but it's just a recognition that at some point you have to be willing to choose yourself in the moment and then continue on that path to move forward. And it's one of the most difficult decisions that I think you're ever going to make, but it's a worthwhile.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I echo that. It's not the intention's not shame, but it is, there's a such thing as healthy shame,
Yeah.
which is the recognition that you could be choosing something more healthy for yourself, that perhaps the way you're living is in violation of your own morality. And I think for men, this is a really important barometer of our own health and well-being. Is there's a real cost. I'm not saying this isn't true for women, but I'm saying like for men to be in violation of your own values is a direct attack on the sacredness of your being. You will pay a price. And that's probably why men are more addicted to things, why men have porn addictions and all different types. And, the society hasn't exactly created an incredibly safe space for men to suffer and men to not be okay. If there's not venues and emotional safety, especially when self-worth is for men often correlated to achievement and providing. It's not correlated in general till you find a woman of real depth in a heterosexual capacity who really values emotional fluency and emotional depth. But to go into the search within yourself as a man to understand and excavate all the parts of your emotionality is a very lonely path at first. And it's one that is really the journey of the warrior. There's the external journey of going out and conquering and doing the thing. But the inner journey is one of going into the shadow, going into addictions, but really going into like, where have I abandoned myself and where have I forgotten about what I truly desire in this world? And am I connected to a deeper purpose? Which doesn't mean you got to quit your job because it's not aligned, but you at least have to acknowledge that's true. And from there, the path will reveal itself. But I see so many, I would say that society is not a place that has generally said, hey, men, we see you're struggling. Here's how we're going to help support you in that. I find that there's a big conversation about a desire for emotionally fluent men, but when they show up, the emotions they're expressing are not welcome, especially if it's grief.
Yeah. It's so interesting. So we get into these relationships with other people and we expect them to be able to hold the things that are going on inside of us. The problem that I see is that oftentimes what you're asking for from your partner, they have never experienced that before. Whatever the example was in their background with the relationships they had with their caregivers, parent, father specifically, when we're talking about male female relationships, she only has to go off of what she actually lived in the moment. If her father was emotionally distant or just not there completely to support her in every way, then you get into these relationships and the guy is sitting there being vulnerable and she's like, whoa, ick, this is gross. Get away from me. I don't like this. And then the relationship is doomed from there. And we hear that story over and over again from guys in the group. So, how would you help them navigate that type of situation where they're with somebody who's asking for vulnerability, but they don't know how to manage that, or it creates or instills fear in the other person?
Well, I think there's a few things to understand about that there is a line where vulnerability is weakness. And I don't mean that vulnerability in and of itself is, but what I mean is that if you and I are on a battlefield and you start crying, we don't have time for that. Do you know what I'm saying? So it
Yeah.
actually becomes a weakness in our effort to collaborate. So there is a time and a place for that. And I think what has been confused is that any vulnerability is weakness. And that if I need a man who's going to protect and take care of me, then how do I also hold space for his vulnerability and his grief and his sensitivity and him sharing the things that he's struggling with, especially if those struggles are correlated to providing or provision or protection, right? That takes in the context of a woman, it takes a woman of multitudes, one who can actually hold that they might sometimes want to shut down and judge their partner and actually maybe doing it energetically. So that in any relational dynamic to be healthy requires two people to take 100% responsibility for their individual selves. So that's a big deal. And I would say that's more rare till it's not. And so if I'm in a relationship with a woman who is having a hard time creating space for me to be emotionally vulnerable and sometimes flips it around on me and weaponizes it, there's probably a really important invitation to learn how to co-create a relationship where there is an agreement about creating emotional safety, and that we're going to learn how to be curious in the company of what we don't know how to, what we don't understand, and what we don't know how to hold. It's interesting because most men, if they face that kind of experience, will often go back to hiding their emotions and will also maybe become a little boy and fawn. There's probably like a mother wound in that. There can be. And really, the invitation is to stand in what we desire to co create in that relationship and say, look, when I share my feelings, I get the sense that you have a really hard time holding them. And sometimes I feel judged. I'm really interested in co creating a relationship where I can share how I feel and you can share how you feel, and that we're not judged for those feelings. Is that something you're interested in? What do you think I could do differently in how I share? Because I think men tend to turn towards their partner for emotional support, and women tend to turn towards their friends. So when a man loses his romantic relationship, he often loses his emotional confidant. And so I think that's just why men's groups and good male friends are so important, because there are some things I can have, let's say the struggle with providing and stress about the economy, etc., that I can bring to my men's group that is very different than I don't bring it to my partner. And I think there's also an important line of learning the difference between oversharing and vulnerability. When we share from a place of oversharing, Brene Brown talks about this, that oversharing is when someone else hasn't earned the right to your story or it hasn't been processed. And no, I don't mean you can't process something in the company of someone else, but what I really see vulnerability as is sharing from a place of you're bringing this thing forward that you desire to be healed or has been healed, but you're not doing it on a first date. I'm talking in the context of an established partnership or friendship. And there's a great saying, I think it's by James Hillman, and it's that we don't go to therapy to have what's broken fixed. We go to have what's broken blessed. And I think that's very much what a group of men can do for a man. And that we can process something, and then when we bring it to our partners, we are bringing it from a more integrated place. If we don't have men for that, then we bring emotional stuff to our partners, sometimes from a more wounded place. And we might be projecting or putting them in more of a mother type of role, if that makes sense. Again, there's lots of nuance to everything I'm saying. So
Yeah, there is. And so much of it includes having the self-awareness to be able to acknowledge a lot of these things that are going on in the relationships that we have with others. And I think that can be a struggle a lot of the times and a barrier to the connection that we truly desire. How do we create enough self-awareness to begin to navigate through some of these challenges in our relationships?
what's so imperative for us to just have a baseline understanding of where do I come from? What shaped me in terms of how I relate? So why do I do what I do? What do I do? So getting a real understanding of what's the reality of how I show up to relationships, what are my strengths, what are my opportunities for development, I guess is a more business related term. And how do I take responsibility for those things and build that skill set? But everyone as a baseline has to understand what shapes them, because you choose somebody almost always who triggers you in a way that's familiar to a parent that triggered you. So generally the thought is that you will find a partner or be attracted to someone who doesn't give you the thing you didn't get, which is a strange, and it's a bit of a mind fuck because you're like, why would I recreate the same circumstances? But it's because unconsciously we desire to resolve them. And of course, the opposite can happen. So if I had a parent who was really absent, I might choose someone who's around too much. And then I feel overwhelmed and smothered. But I'm not experiencing the absence that I originally experienced. I'm just experiencing the opposite of the wound. So when we get the recognition that I choose someone who wounds me in a familiar way, I also wound my person in a familiar way. So I'm doing the same to them. It's not a one-way thing. And through the relationship, we can heal both of those things. So we start to see that the material that comes up in the relationship is actually material that's trying to come forward so it can be healed. And when we orient to our relationship from that perspective, then it's very different. And it's, oh, you're being defensive right now. Okay, what's at the core of that? And that can be helpful, of course, to work with a therapist or coach through that.
For sure. Yeah, you often hear it as whose love did you crave the most when you were younger? That's often what we're looking for. I love that you mentioned that we come together and we create the conditions for these things to exist within our relationships. I talk about this all the time, and anxious attachers get really angry with me when I bring it up because it's the other person's role and job to change because they have to fix themselves. They're the ones that are causing all of this to happen. And it's no, hold up, slow up for a second, because we entered into this with knowledge that we were getting into a relationship with another person. And so we also create the conditions for a lot of the challenges to exist just by being in that relationship with this other person. And so we're playing out these patterns that exist inside of us over and over again until we create that self-awareness.
Yeah, and men tend to be more avoidant, and that's really due more to socialization and the way that men are oriented to in relationship. And so anxiously attached people, and not saying there aren't anxious men, there certainly are, they really have a simple predisposition to seeing that, yeah, that they're more of a martyr. And if you look, the majority of relationship information is consumed by anxious people and secure people, but I would say mainly more anxious. And that makes sense. If I could learn everything about relationship, I'll never get hurt again. If I can understand everything about my partner, it's like dating an addict. And then you like learn everything about addiction. And then you realize that the only way to change the person is to tell them you won't participate in their addiction anymore. And the same is true for an anxious person. The moment if you really want to get an avoidant person to change, be willing to leave them. That's the only way, because that's what the avoidant person has been waiting. Like I think of when I was avoidant, when a woman said, sorry, like the way you're being doesn't work for me. I was like, wait, what? Like she stood for love in that moment, and she stood for my higher potential, and she stopped chasing me. If you think about it, anxious people leave themselves to pursue somebody. Avoidant people leave the space of the relationship to avoid being pursued or caught or avoid closeness. So for both people to resolve their wound is to stand still. And so an avoidant person can't move towards, or even a secure person can't move towards an anxious person if there's no space to step into. And you're dead on that we are all active participants in our relationship dynamic. If an anxious person is dating an addict, the moment the addict quits their drug, the anxious person has to quit their drug, which is trying to get people to change and need to be needed. It's just a different addiction.
Yeah, I always try to speak empowerment into people, regardless of where they're at and what stage they're in, because if you can begin to focus on yourself and the core pillars, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, and you're not filling these cups every day, but you create a habit and a practice out of it. And so you're pouring a little bit into each one of those every day, then you become more capable, competent, and confident in who you are as a person. And so when you engage in these type of relationship dynamics, you're beginning to be able to become the observer. You step back, you zoom out, you acknowledge, you're like, whoa, okay, I see that. I don't like it. I'm actually going to say something in this instance. Now you feel more empowered to do so. And so you're speaking up for and speaking life into the things that you really want to have happen. And I think that's a struggle for a lot of people to shift that mindset. Instead of being the victim to the circumstances, it's no, actually, now I have enough knowledge and capability that I'm going to lean into what I think is right for me.
Want to heal something when they do that,
Yeah.
leaving their own center in order to try to get connection. It's a strange paradox because the thought is that if I pursue people, I'll get to keep them. But actually, in the pursuit of them, I'm not connected to myself. So, what I always wanted was to be chosen. And yet, in the act of pursuing these people, I'm not choosing myself. So, the wound is just perpetuated within myself. So, it's ironic that the like very act of standing still is what heals it because it stopped. It's like when if you consume personal growth information to fix something, you keep reinforcing the belief something's broken. But if you consume personal growth information in order to step more fully into your potential, then it's not evidence of an absence. It's just evidence of what's unrealized, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Now, have you participated in men's groups before?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Lots.
What has your experience been with that?
The first time I ever went to a men's group was, oh, it'd be, I think, probably 10 years ago, maybe 11. And I remember driving with my friend to it, and I said to him, I don't know what I'm going to talk about. Things are good.
Yeah.
And then when it was my
Until
time in
it's
the hot
not.
seat, yeah, it was my time in the hot seat. The facilitator found what was not good pretty quickly. I was forever changed because a lot of my wounds were with men, trusting anger, trusting rage, all that kind of stuff. And so it was really healing. And then I did training in that, and that was great. That was, again, a deeper dive with men who wanted to go deeper into it. And I'm part of a men's group as well. And that has been a really, I'd say, ever so important group to be part of through life's transitions, through relationship changes, through having kids, through all of it, business fluctuations and challenges.
Now, I love that you said that wounds with other men, because I think that's a very common thing, especially over the past, I'd say 50 years or so. When we start looking back at the development of young boys and becoming men, we've missed out on a rite of passage as well as the mentorship that was supposed to come along with being a son. And somehow we missed that. And I'm just curious what your perspective is on the rite of passage and how we can bring that into modern times.
There's not really any delineation that transfers a man or a boy or a teenager into being a man societally. And other than being the age to vote, there's really not much else. Women have menstruation, and menstruation does delineate from going from being a girl to a woman. And so these practices that are as old as time, they don't exist really for the most part. They're starting to make their way back. And for a lot of men, they didn't have fathers who were around or fathers who were even in their home. Even if they were around, they were working. And what's his name? Robert Glover talks about how boys spend the majority of their young life trying to please women and then wonder why they become people pleasing nice guys when they're older. And it's so easy to point the finger to say, when did it first start? Who created? We could blame industrialization. We could blame a lot of things for the absence of men. And that it's not really a male-friendly media conversation as well. And most of the problems in the world are blamed on men. I think often, though, is it a praying mantis that after it bangs its partner, it eats its head? I think it's the female praying mantis. And I was like, at some point, will the praying mantis wake up to consciousness and be like, shit, I've been eating all the heads of all the dudes I hook up with? Like, I think evolutionarily, our consciousness has just become more aware of what we've done from a survival-based evolutionary perspective that we then look in hindsight with the same empathic lens that we have today. And that's really hard to do because then everyone will look back and say, who was it first? And I guess from a creation story, we get to blame Eve. But from other stories, it's men are the reason and patriarchy's the reason. And so I think there's a lot of inherited shame that comes with the waking up to responsibility as men. And so these rites of passages, I think the first part of that is men's groups really offer that opportunity to finally say, okay, we're going to create this space where you're seen as a beautiful, loving, sensitive, kind human being who now has the safety and space to be witnessed in your struggles and your challenges. And actually, what we're going to do as a group is hold you accountable. We're going to allow you to grieve the things that you never got, but also hold you accountable and move you through an initiation so that you actually now are part of a group, but that group has a shared sense of values and integrity. And if you want to be part of this group, then you have to hold those too. And we're not going to tolerate less than that from you. And that's the power of AA. That's the power of men's groups is if you can't hold the bar, then you don't get to hang. And I remember a guy I heard speaking years ago, he had been abducted by like a terrorist group. He was an American guy. I can't remember his name, but he was saying that after he got rescued and brought back to the United States, he would get emails from some of the guys who he hung out with all the time who had held him captive, just checking in on him, see how he was doing after all of this. These are the people who held him hostage. And he said what he noticed was that these people weren't inherently bad men. They just lacked any form of belonging and connectedness in tribes. So their tribe was a gang. Their tribe was a movement. And I think when we really start to align with purpose in terms of purpose being from a place of let's get into a space of being in integrity with what it means to be a good man in this world, then the purpose also that we want to live comes true too. If that makes sense.
No, it does. I think a lot of the challenges is around the messaging that we're receiving, whether that be from social media or the media in general. And there's been a feminization of men and this expectation that you really can't say what you want to say or be who you want to be or act in the way that you want to act, that is very much a part of who you are as a person. And so you have this false self that you're presenting to the world. How can we begin to reclaim, I guess the word would be our masculinity, but there's so much more that goes along with that because it's everything about yourself.
I think there hasn't been a large amount of acknowledgement of what you're saying. We could blame endocrine disruptors and polyester underwear. We can blame it all for the reduction of BPAs in cans for why our testosterone's dropping. Obesity. A lot of us are overweight and not eating healthy. Here's a paradox that's often hard for people to hold is there's a thought that if you take responsibility for everything in your life, then that means that on some level, you're not a victim anymore. And I hear this a lot saying, okay, if the things that happen in your life are the curriculum that is required for you to step in your most badass, most powerful self, then can you hate the curriculum that woke you up? Can you hate who you've been if who you've been is offering you the possibility of who you could be? And so what I hear a lot is, well, that's victim blaming. Obviously, I didn't choose to be a victim of something when I was young. Of course. That's why we have to hold this. The world is not binary, even though we like to pretend it is in all these beliefs and ideologies. But it's you can have been a victim of an experience, yet that experience could have been the very thing that you needed to learn a skill set, step into badassery, reclaim your power. So you can't change the past. You might as well do something with what has happened. And we can point to all the reasons that men have been fucked or fucked over. And then, of course, what we're going to hear in that is, oh, men have it so hard. Oh, the patriarchy was hard for you. We hear all that kind of shit. I can't even tell you the amount of times I've gotten comments where something isn't even about gender and it's misogynistic or it's whatever. And you have to be willing to walk towards what it is you want to create and keep having hard conversations. And it's not negating what has gotten us where we are, which could be an absent father, which could be society, it could be patriarchy, it could be whatever. But at the end of the day, none of that fucking matters. What matters is that we do something about it. So I could blame my dad for a lack of emotionality, even though I'm actually pretty lucky with my dad. But I could blame my mom for being enmeshed with her, and that's what created enmeshing patterns with women and blah, blah. And that's true. And I got to do something about it. And when men take a level of responsibility, I think this is true for everybody, but when men take responsibility from that level of still having compassion for what has shaped them, but zero tolerance for the bullshit anymore. Stop letting polyester underwear be the excuse, which would be a strange excuse, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. That is the power of the pivot. When I shifted out of law enforcement and started doing this work, it was unexpected. I didn't plan on doing this, but it was something that was on my heart to create, to build, to do something new, to do something different. But I had to take an inventory of all the skills that I've cultivated over the years and decades with a master's degree and all the training that I had through the department and everything that I've done in my life. And how can I use this information to better serve other people? How can I help people? How can I be of service? And I think that's a really great question that many of us should be asking ourselves, because it's in that act of being of service that you begin to find more of yourself. When you continually act in this place of you're working for yourself instead of for others, you find yourself creating a barrier to connection with everything around you, and everything that you want and that you desire seems so far away. And it's really easy to be in that service of self and to not have that connection that you really want with other people.
Yeah, it's really easy to distance yourself and become numb to the world.
Yeah.
And think of all the ways that everything is structured to do that. Video games, porn, social media.
I was going to
They
say
are
social
all
media directed at men.
they're all specifically, do you know how many times I open my home feed and I've said not interested in the bootylicious
Yeah.
thing, and I end up with the bootylicious thing? Of course, on a evolutionary level, I'm very interested in the bootylicious thing. But I have to be like, okay, I got to curate my mind. I've got to curate my mind.
Yeah.
And that's discipline. And I think that's probably where someone like David Goggins or Jordan Peterson, who says, make your bed, make your bed. Like that level of, it seems unimportant, but it's actually so important because you're building evidence that you are who you say you are. You're building trust that when you say you're going to do something, you do it. And that raises testosterone levels because you become badass.
No, I agree. I also agree with that not interested, not interested, and then it keeps feeding you more of what you're not
Fucking
interested
hell.
in. I don't care about pimple popping. I don't care about people getting beards, or I know I'm bald. I always see the toupee thing. Like, can we just stop with that
Dude,
stuff? I'm
I
just
get DMs from Turkish hair transplant places. I was like, okay, I get it.
like, I hear you.
Turns. Yeah.
It's not going to change anytime soon, folks.
No. They're like, we'll
No.
fly you in and give you a hair transplant. I'm like, I'm good. I'm good.
No, so I saw a dude on TikTok go through that, and he flew out to Turkey, did the whole thing, and just the amount of swelling in your head, I think, for the amount of hair that you get, I'm just like,
You have to go
no.
into hiding for a while.
Yeah, there's just, and then the possibility of infection if you're not taking care of it properly, it's too much of a risk. And for what do you get out of it? You
Yeah, I'm
feel a
not
little bit better
interested.
because you have hair? Just go bald. I
Dude.
even have burn scars on the back of my head from third-degree burns, and it took me a long time to be able to shave my head because of the burns. Because people always mention it. Oh, you shave too close? No, it's actually third-degree burns from boiling
Yeah.
water, but that's fine. And I had to learn to just take the joke and roll with it. But it was a
Mm.
sensitive subject for a while because it's all red
Yeah, of
back
course.
there and it just looks like splatter. It's not attractive. But that's the shame, right? We hide the
Hmm.
things that make us feel shame. So a lot of men feel confused about how to relate to feminine energy, especially after a divorce or in co-parenting dynamics. We see this a lot where they don't necessarily want to be together in terms of the relationship. Obviously, they're separated at this point, but they still have to see each other, whether it's at soccer games or sporting events or ballet, whatever it is that the event is. How can you begin to navigate that without feeling all the mixed emotions of anger and just frustration and maybe a little bit of guilt, and then you're also grieving because that timeline no longer exists anymore.
Man, holding the complexity of relationship endings and then co-parenting with that is It's hard. And it is always my belief that we should do everything we can to excavate what lives between us and another person. If I have a kid now, before I couldn't give this advice because I didn't have a kid, but I have one now, and I can say that it would always be in the highest interest for me. This is what I think, to model for my son what it means to be good to his mother. Now, granted, sometimes the mother might not be good to me, right? That could be a possibility for some guys. And so we're not looking to, because I think we can get caught in the people don't know how shitty she is or people don't know how awful she was. And don't get me wrong, that can be really painful. And I still come back to, what am I teaching my child? What are we teaching our children? And you're not always going to get a participant in that. Like the other co-parent might not want to be a participant in that conversation or in that healing or in that change. But we have to do everything we can. And I think if we had really challenging relational endings, we can do a number of things that can help heal that. Like we could do a ceremony where we celebrate the ending of our relationship and we hear each other's grievances and we hold space for each other's grievances. It might not happen in one effort. If there's been infidelity, things like that, again, really challenging. And sometimes the other person might not be the space. Like I interviewed a therapist about this, about all the different ways that people co-parent and maintain their sanity with boundaries. And so sometimes because they have such animosity, the only way they communicate is through email. But to have shared agreements about, in interest of the children, how are we going to act? How are we going to greet at soccer? What are the things that allow both of us to feel safe on some level? Again, I recognize that not everyone's going to be a willing participant in that conversation, but we have to create the boundaries for ourselves and do whatever we can if we're responsible for a lot of those fractures, actually taking responsibility for that and participating in the healing that's required.
I saw it on the other end of the spectrum with being a police officer, and we would come to all these different events with people, most challenging times that they had, and you can see there's just so many other things on board within the container of those relationships that for them to even be able to bring any peace into that relationship seems almost impossible, like it could never happen. And I think that's where it's important for the individual to be able to recognize, okay, if that's how it is, what type of life do you want to continue to live? Like, where do you want to go with all of this if that's how it's going to be? And so I love the email option where you set the boundary that we can communicate through email and emergencies can be via phone, of course, that makes sense. And then move forward from there. But actually establishing that, I think, is super challenging because it means that you have to stand up for yourself and
Mm.
believe in, and maybe you've never done that before. So for somebody who hasn't taken the strides to stand up for themselves, how can they begin to do that, to assert themselves in that type of situation?
Well, I think when you have children, you unlock a new motivation. Now it's okay, if I've never stood up for myself, what am I teaching my child about standing up for themselves? Because ultimately, what we don't heal gets passed on. And so we'll just see our children become very similar, maybe in different dynamics, but they'll become very similar. So I think there's a level of responsibility that another generation can create in us for saying, okay, I'm going to learn how to create boundaries. Now, look, if you study boundaries, you can learn the right language, you can practice, you can get scripts, you can actually get the type of language that will give you the chance. Now, the other thing is you want to surround yourself with other people. For the first time you lay a boundary, you need the borrowed belief from someone else. So you need to be hanging out with your buddy. You send the text message. And then you're able to read the message you might get in reply through a regulated lens. So there's just knowing that if you're going to finally stand up for yourself, that there is a normal level of anxiety that comes with that. And that's a really big know that the nervous system codes different as dangerous. So when you start to show up differently, you will feel dysregulated. That's normal. The first boundary you ever lay is probably one of the scariest things because we believe that a boundary is successful if the other person agrees to it. But actually, a boundary is successful if you express it, because you actually are not setting the boundary just for the boundary. You're actually setting the boundary to hear your own voice. And it's through the hearing of your voice that you're actually changed. And something shifts in that. And when you start to value your boundaries, you will value other people's boundaries. And so just like slow and steady too. And I'd say for people who are really starting to desire to step into your power, you have to look for wherever else in your life you give it away. So if you don't have good boundaries with your, let's say, your romantic partner or your co-parent, you probably have pretty bad boundaries everywhere. You probably have bad boundaries with food. You probably have bad boundaries with fitness. You probably have bad boundaries at work. And so it's really starting to say, like, a great exercise you can do is you just draw a like stick person, and then you put a circle around that stick person, and you just write out, if I was like feeling whole and complete, what behaviors and people could live inside this circle. And so then you start to see, I can't put that person in this circle. Like, that doesn't make sense. And you can do it in a different way where you just go, okay, where in my life do I feel stickiness, frustration, stress, resentment? What choices, what people? And then you can just list by list go, what would need to change in this relationship to alcohol or to someone that would allow it to feel safe and productive? And is it even possible? Because with alcohol, the answer might be no. With a toxic person, the answer might be no.
Yeah.
When we were talking about this ability to create peace in relationships, sometimes what creates peace is actually not participating in a relationship anymore. And so if your normal pattern is to leave your own peace in order to try to pursue it somewhere else and create it somewhere else, then doing the opposite is often the healthy thing. And there's a great saying that we keep going to the wrong places for the right things. So when we finally learn to stop reaching where people don't reach back, that's a really powerful thing. And it's also quite healing.
I would agree with that. It's so interesting when you turn away a relationship for the first time, and it can be early stages of dating, but you've done the work, you get into the vetting process, you start trying to figure all these things out for yourself. What are my goals, values, and standards for a relationship with me? And you've got everything written down and you've memorized it. You've written it on your soul and you're prepared. And then you find this person, you're like, oh, this is amazing. This is great. You fall into some old patterns for a little bit of time. And then you begin to recognize, oh, no, you've created some space for yourself. You have time to think about it. This actually isn't for me, and it's okay for me to say no. And I don't have to continue this just because it's been 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. I recognize that this isn't something for me. The first time that you do that is such an overwhelming feeling of I just did something for myself, I think, for the first time. And you're like, holy smokes. And then you get to practice that as you continue on in your relationships, and you do get a little bit better at recognizing and acknowledging these things a little bit earlier on in the process.
Yeah, you definitely do. And you start to get evidence that you stand in yourself. And what a powerful thing to say, you're not going to compromise who you are for people anymore.
Yeah. The other question we get a lot is, how do I know when I'm actually ready to start dating?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I always equate it to, like, if you starting dating is you avoiding parts of yourself, then you're not ready to date. But if dating both excites you and terrifies you, then you're probably ready. And I don't think anyone is completely healed outside of relationship, because I agree with the premise that Harville Hendricks and Helen Hunt say, which is, you're born in relationship, you're wounded in relationship, and you heal in relationship. But when you're single and you're figuring your shit out, and then you start dating again, and all of a sudden you get triggered and you're like, fuck, I thought I had my poop in a group. Like I thought I had it together.
Yeah.
And you think, oh, it's not, I didn't do it right. I'm not doing it right. I got to go back. And it's like, no, of course, what's happening is you're being triggered in relationship. And so having boundaries when you don't have to deal with somebody is easy. But having boundaries when you're negotiating with someone else's boundaries and values and needs and wants is way harder. Most people are either too open in relationship or closed, and you could see that as anxious or avoidant. And and so we really need to learn, and this is, I think, the ultimate act of learning how to be in partnership, is how do I be connected to you and connected to me at the same time? Most of us are connected to the other person, but we don't feel safe, or we're connected to ourselves, but we don't feel connected to the other person. So it's how do we curate what we allow and really control the flow of energy between us and another person?
No, I agree. Differentiation.
Yeah, saying no to what isn't for you, Cam. That's so great. It's if you can't say no to something or someone, then what you say yes to is not a true yes. So that's why it's like imperative that most people, when they have not had boundaries, actually have to build walls first. So it's actually normal for someone who's been boundaryless to isolate themselves, move, do something. Because what happens is when you've been overtly connected to other people and their needs and their wants, you actually have to build a wall around you. So you finally experience what a self is. And then you try to enter back into connecting with other people. Ah, that's great. It's acquiescence, not a yes. That's a great line.
So what would you tell people who are on social media that love to say, it's all over TikTok, right? I am good alone. I'm never going to date again. I don't need to be with anybody. This is the healthiest I have ever been in my life. I'm good. What do you tell them?
Oh, I'm not on TikTok. Is that a common conversation on TikTok?
Oh, it's everywhere. But yeah,
Yeah, I'd say they're full of shit because,
they just don't know it. Yeah.
yeah, humans are relators. We're meant to be in relationship with other people. We do much better in relationship with other people. The greatest predictor of our health is the quality of our relationships. Doesn't have to be romantic, can be just friendships. Being able to depend on other people. It's just being able to depend on other people and not lose ourselves or at the cost of ourselves is the really big thing. And so when someone says, I've never been better alone, that could be true. And I never need to be with anybody else. I would say almost always that is coming from a guarded space. It's like when someone is a dick and they say, well, this is just who I am. And I'm like, that's because there's some level of fear that someone won't accept you for who you are. So you are belligerent or you're unkind in the way you deliver things. And you give this ultimatum. And so you never really allow people close. And by design, of course, you push people away. And so it's the same thing when someone says, I never need to love anybody again or be in a relationship again. Now, granted, some people have been through ultimate pain. And when they do the mathematics and they go relationship versus not, I get it. If you live in a small town and there's not a lot of connections in your town and you're going, I don't really want to pour into anybody. I've poured into people for 60 years. Great. You do you. And I think at the end of the day, even when I was on a plane once and this woman was 70 and she said to me that it was too late for her. And I was like, shit, she was telling me that she had 90-year-old relatives. You got 20 years.
Right.
Like your whole life can change in 20 years. You could be in a partnership for the last 15. It's like when someone says it's too late to get fit. You can start building muscle at any age. You could start getting fit at any age. And what a beautiful thing that is.
Oh, it really is. I love seeing these 70-year-olds again. It's on TikTok, but they're getting in the best shape of their lives. And you're like, holy smokes, look at Granny go. It's yes.
Dude,
Knock it out of the park,
RFK, that
man.
guy's
Yeah.
jacked. That guy's 70, I think.
Yeah. So what's one thing that you're working on right now or something that you're excited for or just something that you're interested in?
I'm really fascinated with the correlation of social media and smartphones to the nervous system. That's something I've been, because of my own journey of having a significant social media following and then being like, why am I so overwhelmed by this thing? I was talking to Stephen Porges, who's the founder of polyvagal theory, and I was saying to him, I was just talking to him about how I felt about social media. And I was saying, like, here you have this entity that is constantly judging the quality of what you put out into the world. And he said, you know, what's really happening is you're constantly being surveyed. And so the nervous system can't differentiate a digital version of you from a real version of you. And when we got into that, and what I extrapolated from that was like, you and I, if we were sitting in a village having this conversation around a fire, and let's say we're concerned because we're talking about touchy subjects. And then when we get off that stage or around the fire and everyone goes to bed, we're no longer at social risk. Our nervous system actually gets to downregulate and we get to recover while we're sleeping. But now there's a version of you, whether you have a business or just a private account, doesn't matter. There's a version of you that exists 24 hours a day that is available for social risk. And so a lot of people don't realize that the reason they have anxiety in connection to their social media is because their nervous system is always allotting a percentage of its surveillance to what might be happening, not in this moment. Now, what's interesting about this, which correlates to it, is that if I go on a date and I have my phone face down on a table, I'm actually less likely to be as vulnerable because there's a part of me that's always thinking about what's going on my phone. So you could tell there's a percentage of people's consciousness that is assigned to this thing that always exists. Now, I think there are ways to manage that, but I think the first one is awareness. But the second thing is I'm starting to really notice is what is the correlation to notifications and trolls and things like that to insulin resistance? Because the body can't differentiate.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, like a real threat from a perceived threat. So if you're at social risk and someone, let's say, comments and says you're a bigot, blah, 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 whatever trope gets thrown out, you'll likely experience a bump in your glucose because your glucose is pouring into your body to get you into fight, flight, freeze, fawn. And so I was starting to see that when I was wearing a continuous glucose monitor. I was just thinking, oh my God, are we actually creating insulin resistance due to consistently dumping glucose in our blood due to checking notifications? Something to think about.
That's super interesting. Yeah. It's also interesting. I don't have kids, right? So it's like you're not allowed to say anything because you don't have kids. But it's, yeah, I'm alive. I'm in the world. I read stuff. I'm familiar with some
You can
things.
say stuff.
I might
My
know.
friend used to say to me, the best parenting advice comes from people who don't have kids, to just own it. And I think there's truth. Come on.
There's a
own it.
little, there's a reflection of something, right?
Yeah.
You're an observer. I'm not in it. I don't have to live with it. You do. So that's your thing. So good luck with that. But you see it. It's okay. So you see a little kid, 2-year-old, 3-year-old, and they have an iPad in front of them and they're all cracked out on it. You can see it in their eyes. They're just like, they're bug-eyed. They're into it. And they're learning to color on an iPad with their finger. They're not coloring. They're just moving their finger across the screen, but they got this blue light being shined into their eyes. And then by the time they're 5 years old, oh, they have ADHD. Oh, do they?
Oh, yeah.
Are you sure about that? Because their little brains cognitively aren't meant to hold that, one, that type of information, two, that screen being so close to their face. And then you're wondering why aren't they sleeping at night and why are they struggling and what's going on? And
Same for people.
yes. And so that's why I think it's interesting when you talk about the phone. A lot of people have had success with shifting their phone to grayscale, so they're not checking it as much. I don't have notifications on my phone. I only check when I want to check. So that's been good for me. But your phone's basically a casino. So it would make sense that all of these things are going off inside of your body because you're constantly have all of this stuff available to you. You're just pulling the lever to get the next hit.
Yeah, the impact of blue light on melatonin production, which is also a precursor for so many other things. You think about our heads are down in our phones, mitochondrial function. Like there's so many correlatives to technology and ADHD. The new sort of hot term is neurodivergence.
Yes.
And I think I have a lot of thoughts on that too, of just here's another way that someone gets to say that they, and I'm not discrediting true neurodivergent, but who doesn't have ADHD in a TikTok world? The greatest act of rebellion now is to decide where your attention goes, to actually be the person who decides. Most people have no discernment over where their attention goes. And news companies and social media platforms, there's a famous YouTuber who said, they're colonizing every second of your life. They took all the land. Now they're coming for every moment of your life. And I think there's so much truth to that.
I agree. If you let them.
If you let them. And so that's why it's like, we're not saying get rid of social media, although that might be the answer. We're also not saying get rid of your phone. But what we are saying is that you need to decide the relationship you have with that, because if you can't say no to it, you can't say yes to it, as Cam was saying too.
No, I totally agree. It's hard, but when you live on social media as part of your job and what you do, it's really hard to put the phone away.
Yeah, it is very hard.
Yeah. Get a Faraday bag, push it away, focus on yourself. Mark, I can't thank you enough for being here today and sharing all your wisdom with us. Thank you so much. Tell everybody where they
Yeah,
can reach
thanks
you
for
and
having me.
work with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. Yeah, you can find me at markgroves.com. If you want to work with me, there's a coaching space in there for my work on like relationship, that I have a community. It's at createthelove.com. And that's where I have courses on like boundaries, breakups, dating, all that kind of stuff that we talked about. And yeah, man, I'm really appreciative. Thanks for having me on.
And for everybody listening, be sure to get his book, Liberated Love. It is absolutely amazing. There's so much that you're going to learn from that. And I've handed it off like an anxious attacher might to a couple of friends of mine who have gotten so much value from that book with the way it was written through that lens of codependency. It's truly transformational. So thank you for writing it. It's awesome.
Thanks, man. Really
Thanks.
appreciate that.
Thanks, Mark. All right, guys. See ya.